Hi, my name is Bill White, and I'm a PhD student currently in the School of Anthropology at the University of Arizona. I wanted to give you a really quick presentation on a project that I'm working on in the River Street neighborhood in Boise, Idaho. It is focused on racial dynamics in the city of Boise, and River Street was a very interesting place and a unique place because it was considered the black neighborhood, even though it was occupied by majority of white people or non-blacks. My research has shown that River Street was really important in the racial dynamics because it created a place that white people, which Boise is majoritively white, could contrast themselves against. I've been doing a lot of archival research and I've found a lot of really interesting things. And one particularly interesting event happened in the summer of 1940 when a homesteader, Royal Hendrickson, shot and killed two federal agents in the in the Boise foothills. So obviously, when a black homesteader in Idaho shoots two police officers, doesn't matter who it is, there's going to be a lot of other police officers that came, and needless to say, he was shot to death by dozens of police officers. So Hendrickson didn't live in the River Street neighborhood, but most of Boise's blacks lived in River Street. Hendrickson actually lived in the foothills outside of town, and the way that this shooting has been remembered is different for most people in Boise. Basically, it's almost forgotten. Uh, I haven't met a single white person who remembers this shooting, and I've only met a couple of older black people who remember their parents telling them about this. So remember, this was the 1940s. Their parents were telling them about this shooting, and as far as the black community in Boise perceived it, they thought that it was just another instance that demonstrated how far white people would go to keep blacks in line in Idaho. Now, the River Street neighborhood, it's one small corner of Boise, Idaho. For those of you who don't know, Boise is the capital of Idaho. It's in the west. It's been the capital for over 120 years, and it has almost always been, over 90% white. Uh, Boise's current population, black population of 1.5% is the highest it's ever been, and we're talking 2014. And as I said before, the River Street neighborhood was historically considered the black neighborhood. So River Street was developed in anticipation of the arrival of the Oregon Short Line Railroad, which you can see runs right to the north of the neighborhood. Um, Land speculators bought land and they platted that whole area in anticipation of creating housing for railroad employees and warehouses. So River Street has always been like this place where there's real estate speculation, and it's been a majoritively renter neighborhood for the longest time, and it still is today. Memoryscapes. So what am I even talking about? Of course, this is some kind of high-minded PhD talk, I guess. So basically, it's a concept that I came across in geography literature, and I noticed that it had a lot to do with archaeology, some of the concepts that we talk about in landscape archaeology, and this concept called memory work in archaeology. So being an archaeologist, I just kind of see the world that way. But what I mean by memoryscapes, I'm talking about people use memories to describe and interpret the world that they live in, and they use these memories to navigate the landscape within which they live. So archaeologists, social scientists believe that landscapes are created through culture. It's a concept that we figure out. I mean, of course, there's a landscape that exists outside of us, but we can't necessarily know it because we're human beings and we have culture. So the land that we live on, yeah, it exists. The way that we perceive that is interpreted through our cultural lens. The geographers believe that memoryscape is a refinement of this concept, and what they're talking about is the way that we create meaning, different layers of meaning that help us comprehend the world that we live in. So, whiteness. Why would I talk about white people when River Street was basically the black neighborhood? So it goes back to a lot of the anthropological concepts. Those of you who aren't anthropologists, let me break this down. Ontology, what I mean here is the way that an individual knows things, the way that they interpret the world that they live in. And structuration, it's just a fancy word for us to talk about the way that society is divided and set up into different groups and systems in order for our society to work. So emic mean the emic bubble there. I'm talking about the way that an individual sees themselves in the world based on their internal view. And the edic on the other side is the way that other people see you, people who are on the outside who are not you, the way they see you. So down below you can see in the way our society is structured, the us means social groups and elements that you are part of, and them, I'm talking about the things that are outside of you. So you can see where racial identity is really a nexus between all these different concepts. It exists only because individuals absorb it as their own personal identity, and because people on the outside project that identity. The only way that racial identity exists is because of us and them. Whiteness studies. Probably never heard about that. Social scientists, it seems like in the 1990s, decided that, or basically they realized that they had a race and that it wasn't just studying other people of other races. And so the whiteness studies is talking about the way that white people and whiteness as a racial construct is created. And they've kind of come to the conclusion that whiteness is like the backdrop against which American society is projected. So all of our forefathers and venerated people are white people. The customs and the jobs and the positions in the world that we respect and that we really look up to are predominantly white creations. There's not a lot of traditional African tribal creations. There's not a lot of Native American elements in our society that we really look up to. Things that white people have created in our society are considered the baseline against which others are contrasted. So, this is coming out of whiteness studies. We're talking about social scientists here, geographers, sociologists, and now anthropologists too. So, bringing this concept to River Street. I was talking before, we know the world based on our memories. We interpret things based on not only our internal perspective, but also the way other people are projecting their expectations upon us. So in River Street, you can really see the dialogue between white people and black people, and it's visible on the landscape because it was a segregated community. Now, racialized memoryscape. I'm talking about concepts that I've figured out based on interviews that I've made with people who lived in River Street and archival resources that I've gotten, and the way that people remember things is almost universally the same as far as people who lived in River Street, but there's just a couple of slight variations that seem to be really strongly influenced by race. So the place of River Street, that's not contested. It's a bounded area that everybody, the people who lived in River Street and the people who live outside of River Street, they all agree this is the place. They can easily mark it off on the map if they know what I'm talking about. It had a negative connotation and a negative reputation, and a lot of that had to do with the racialization process in Boise. So white people wanted that to be a place for blacks and others to live because that meant that the rest of the town was theirs. That was a place where upstanding whites lived. But the people who live there always want to say that it wasn't a bad place. There was a couple of bad things and a small stretch of a street that did have some illegitimate activity going on, but the neighborhood was basically community. It was a neighborly place where everybody got together regardless of race. And so this has been demonstrated through several interviews and transcripts. It seems to be the mantra that goes throughout time that River Street was a middle-class neighborhood, It was a place where people of all races came together and lived, and there was only one small area, Pioneer Street, where any kind of illegitimate activity was going on. And regardless of race, everybody wants to stress the fact that it was a very neighborly place, and that the content of your character really did prevail there. Um, Regardless of race, the people who live in the neighborhood all say that the discrimination came from outside of the neighborhood and was projected upon them. So the one thing that I've seen that does differ, white people in the conversations I've had with them say that they were discriminated against because they live there. They say that there was some stigmatization of their identity because they lived in River Street, and that people outside of River Street treated them differently. Now, black people, it goes without saying that they were discriminated against in the rest of Boise, but they don't necessarily see that the white people were treated the same way because they lived there. So I'm an archaeologist. How does any of this stuff relate to archaeological theory? Now, don't be confused by this slide here. It's actually overwhelming, but I put it in there because this represents a lot of the concepts that anthropologists and archaeologists are focusing on these days, and I argue that Memoryscapes really can go along with any of these kinds of theoretical constructs. Basically, Memoryscapes is a malleable concept that can be applied to any of these different aspects of archaeological work. So in conclusion, River Street has been developed pretty hard. The residential portion of that neighborhood is almost all the way gone, and someday it's going to only exist in our memories. Landscapes are places where we live, but those things are interpreted differently based on our society, our culture, our motives in life. And memoryscapes, I feel like, not only talk about the way we remember landscapes, but also the way that we use our memories in the present to interpret the landscapes that we currently inhabit. River Street had to become a racialized place in order for white people to have something to contrast themselves against. A lot of that discrimination and segregation was projected upon blacks and others by the wider white community, and River Street was a necessary place where non-whites lived. And there was a lot of effort that was put into maintaining this segregation, the Royal Hendrickson thing. A lot of black people believe that that is just one example. People who live there want everyone to know that it was a middle-class neighborhood where people of all races lived in a neighborly fashion. And as far as the wider application to archaeology, Memoryscapes is just a tool that we need to start using on a lot of different other concepts. So first of all, I can't begin to thank the people who helped me with this project enough. The Boise City Department of Arts and History gave me a generous grant that I used to create the River Street Digital History Project, which this video is going to be featured on. I highly recommend that you check it out. Other grants came from the University of Arizona and the Charles Redd Center for Western Studies. I can't thank the people who helped me with the project enough, Pam Demo and Dr. Jill Gill. I'm really standing on the shoulders of their excellent research. Michael Davidson has donated an enormous amount of her time to help me get and digitize information from the Idaho State Historical Society archive in Boise. My advisor, Maria Nieves-Cedeno, and then those who I interviewed, John Bertram, Dick Madry, Lee Rice II, and Warner Terrell. I really can't thank you all enough. And I can't thank those of you who actually took the time to listen to this entire presentation. Take care.